Welcome back to the channel. I'm Trevor with Maker Experiment, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my laser journey. Talking about how I got started, my process along the way, and where I am today and how I got here. So let's get into it. This may end up being a long video. I don't know. We're gonna see. I'm just gonna lay out kind of my journey and where I got started, and we'll go from there. Growing up, I actually was working in the workshop with my dad, doing woodworking projects and things like that, and I always thought that I would get into woodworking as a hobby. Now, in 2013, I ended up in South Carolina working full-time as an engineer and needed a hobby, but we were in a rental house. And actually, I think at that time we were in an apartment. So woodworking wasn't really an option just because I didn't have anywhere to put any tools. And at the time, my budget was fairly small. Keeping that in mind, I decided to look around and see what would allow me to be creative and make cool things, but be relatively inexpensive to get started. And I ended up landing on paper cutting of all things. So if you don't know, paper cutting is basically taking cardstock and printing a design that you make onto it, and then cutting it with a knife or an art knife. You could use X-Acto knives and things like that with a self-healing mat. So all in, I think I paid maybe $20 for the paper cutting supplies, maybe $30. When you take into account the mat and the art knife and then some cardstock paper. I already had an inkjet printer, so I didn't have to spend any money there. And that's where I started. So my paper cutting was things such as this one. So I custom drew my own designs. This one is actually Alice in Wonderland, and this was an anniversary gift for my wife. Pretty much with everything I do, I wanted to be super detailed, and I wanted to make it a challenge to cut pretty much every single design I made. Some were very difficult and took 20 hours to hand cut one. I would say minimum I spent 5 or 6 hours cutting a single design. Now you can imagine if you're trying to sell that to just get more supplies for your hobby, most people don't want to pay the amount of money that your time warrants for something like that. And that is when I started looking into lasers. I discovered that lasers could cut paper, and that was originally what I was going into them for. And I found someone local in Greenville, and his name is Bill, and he runs Pinpoint Creative Studio, as well as the Gilded Line. I'll put his links in the description below because I actually owe a lot to him when it comes to how I got started and my journey. So I started by talking to Bill and kind of laid out what I wanted to do. I wanted to essentially start on paper cutting, which quickly evolved into other things after getting involved and seeing what he did. And I started out by paying him to make the items on the laser for me, and then I would resell them. So you can imagine that this isn't necessarily the best for your profits, but it's a good entry into the laser world to see if you enjoy it and if you like it. And for me, it was a good incubator, I'll say, for learning what I wanted to do, seeing if I had a true interest in lasers, and then going from there. Over the next year or two, so through 2013 and 2014, I became good friends with Bill, and he taught me how to run his laser, which was an EPILOG Zing. And he walked me through it and how to run it and different ins and outs of it and how you could change the settings and basically all of the beginner stuff that you need to know. And then he would show me different things he would make on the different materials. And this was very inspiring to me because he had a design background and showed me what was possible. Fast forward maybe a year after that, I ended up trying to look for my own, and EPILOG at that time was out of my price range. I've gotten a lot of comments recently thinking that I bought my Fusion M2 laser as my first ever laser, and that's not the case at all. And I'm gonna go through everything I've been up through to now, so you'll know exactly what machines I've owned. It was really cool to learn on that epilogue because I knew what to expect out of a good machine, which gave me a baseline, because I didn't really know what I was getting into from owning a machine on my own. Now, to this point, I had saved up enough money from what I had made through him that I had maybe $1,000 or $2,000 to work with. And let's be honest, that's not a lot when it comes to laser machines. So I did the next best thing and looked at Craigslist. So as shady as Craigslist can be at times, I ended up finding a laser for $900 used on Craigslist. So this was a full spectrum hobby laser. So it was the 5th generation. A lot of people have owned it, and I got my official start with my own laser on that. So it had the glass tube, the water chilling loop, all of that. And I had it for about a year, and during that year, I realized how much tinkering I had to do to get it to run right. And part of that could be the fact that it was bought used. Part of it could be the fact that, you know, it's a hobby level machine and I was trying to run production level quantities, and it just didn't always pan out. Occasionally I would run a job and I'd be running a full sheet of pins or magnets or whatever, and midway through, the engraving would just jump and start engraving half an inch to the right. And then it threw off everything and trashed material. So I have wasted way too many sheets of material. And I've wasted sheets of wood, acrylic, you name it, I've probably wasted at least a sheet of it. But it was a good learning process because in that process, I learned, you know, how the machine worked. I learned what I had to adjust to get it to work properly, the belts, the mirrors, the lenses, and everything with alignment and what was associated. So it was a good learning experience to have that machine. I will say that I could not work with it to produce larger quantities of things reliably. After about that year, the tube ended up dying, and the replacement process for the tube was just complex with how it had to happen, and you had to solder your own connections. And I decided to part it out and sell it off. And luckily, somebody in the next town over in North Carolina had 2 or 3 of these machines and just needed certain parts from them. And these machines, I think, new were $5,000 or $6,000. So when he came to me, he said, "Hey, I don't care if your tube is dead. I'll just buy the machine as is and I'll pay you $1,500. Sold. Like, that was a great deal because I bought it for $900. I killed it with the tube and then sold all the parts for $1,500. So I actually ended up making money by killing it somehow. That put me back to where I didn't have a laser any longer. So I started going back to Bill. And at that point, we had stayed connected and stayed friends. And if I needed something cut, it was at that point where he just said, "You know what, come over. You can run the laser. I'm gonna go work out. Like, just come over, use it, and close up shop when you're done." Which was really cool. It gave me a great opportunity to learn and run it and get familiar with it. And that's what really sold me on the EPILOG brand. You know, I still use EPILOG today, and unless it's a machine that EPILOG doesn't make, I don't expect to change anytime soon. So at that point I said, you know what, if I'm gonna invest in another machine, I want it to be an EPILOG specifically. I looked again and discovered that yet I still could not afford a brand new one. I think at the time, they were running maybe $8,000, $9,000 for the machine I was looking at. So I did the next best thing again, shady Craigslist, and looked at Craigslist for probably 2 or 3 months at that point. and I set up alerts for what I wanted to look for. So I put in the keywords EPILOG specifically because that would trigger any posting related to that machine. And I was living in South Carolina, so I decided, hey, I'm okay with driving. I think I put a 10-hour window either way. So basically a 10-hour circle from where I was. And said, look for any EPILOG laser within that 10-hour circle. And after 2 or 3 months, I was on a business trip and I got an alert that an EPILOG Mini 24 was for sale in Florida. I looked at it and it said it was completely dead. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with it, and its selling price was $5,000, which, if you know anything about the EPILOG Mini, the price was, I think, maybe $14,000, $15,000, maybe even $16,000 at the time for a brand new one. So $5,000 seemed like a steal. So the first thing I did was message the person that owned it, said, hey, I'm interested, to basically hold my place in line and say, hey, I'm first. Because sometimes that's what you need to do, is be the first one there. So I said, hey, I want to do a little bit more research. Can you send me the serial number? So a big thing if you're buying a used machine is ask for the serial number, because then the manufacturer can track what parts have been purchased for that machine. I got the error code that was coming up, and I called EPILOG that day and said, hey, there's this used machine I'm looking at buying, and it just says it's dead. It doesn't say what's wrong with it. It gives me this error code, but I want to talk to you and figure out, what has been replaced and what could be the worst case scenario. So what could I end up having to replace if everything was bad? So basically all motors, all mirrors, all lenses, the tube, the motherboard, everything. And at that time, the technical support guy for EPILOG told me that, the machine carcass would still be good, all the rails should still be good, it'd be the motherboard, the motors, the things I just mentioned. At the time, I was like, okay, well, what's the worst case scenario if I have to replace every single bit of that? And he said, you're probably looking at about $5,000. Up to this point, I hadn't actually made $5,000 from my hobby. So here comes the caveat that I don't think a lot of people know, and that is, while I was working with the hobby machine and working with Bill on the side, I had taken a part-time job at the local community college to teach 3D CAD, specifically CATIA. So CATIA was my specialty. I got hired at the technical college to teach it. And I started putting that money aside from those paychecks and putting it in towards my laser fund. So my whole goal was not take any money from my paycheck. I needed to do it all from either hobby or side hustle. I saved up money from that, and then I also ended up, through the community college, I took on a gig with solidprofessor.com, who make 3D CAD training videos, and I ended up making the first 4 classes of CATIA content on their platform, which was well over 200 videos of online content, and it took months to build all of it. But the good side was it paid for this new laser. So I took the money that I earned from teaching college and from doing those training videos, and I was able to cash purchase the dead EPILOG for $5,000. I took a huge gamble. From there, I called EPILOG and said, hey, I'm gonna go buy this. If I need to replace the tube, what's the warranty? And I found out that if you replace the tube, they gave you a new 2-year warranty on the tube. So that sold me. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do it. So I called the guy up, said, hey, I want to buy the laser. We worked it out when I would come down. And he lived in Florida 8 hours away. So I did what every sensible person would do and drove a 16-hour round trip in a day because I was excited. I told my wife, I was like, hey, I'm gonna do this. She said, you do you, and I love her for that. And I set off. So I left at, I think, 3 in the morning, and I drove straight to Florida, only stopping for restroom breaks and gas. Made it there in about 7 to 8 hours, and then picked up the laser, checked it out, and then brought it straight back. So I couldn't test run it. Even when you powered it on, it gave you the narrow code, so nothing happened. So it's a huge risk. It was a $5,000 risk. And it's a lot different than if you're taking on a loan for a machine that is coming from the factory and you know it's gonna run. This was it could be a $5,000 paperweight that I sink $5,000 more into. And when I got it back home, the first thing they said was it's probably the tube, so let's do that first. So I sent the tube off. It was about $1,300, I think, to replace. And I got the new tube in, and it booted right up like magic, and it was perfect from that point on. So I ended up spending a total of about $6,300 on my EPILOG Mini 24 and used that through my time in South Carolina. So my wife and I decided to move to Nevada, where we are now. And when we moved to Nevada, I decided to bring all of my tools with me. So I loaded up all the tools at that point. We had a house when I bought the laser, and I did all that. But we moved all of it, and I drove cross country with the laser personally. So my work moved me and all of our house. And then the critical items that we didn't want to get damaged, we made sure to basically drive ourselves. My wife flew out, and I ended up driving with my father-in-law across the country for 3 days until we got here. And we unloaded everything and basically set up the laser here. So once I was here, I had used the laser for maybe another 6 to 9 months. And at the time I was getting a lot of orders for signs. And the signs that I was getting orders for were 2 foot by 3 foot, which in South Carolina, I could just go to my friend Bill and he'd help me out. Here, I didn't have anybody. And I got local quotes, and some of them were, $4 to $5 a minute to cut something. And that would work out to, $400 or $500 just to cut the sign. And that just wasn't, because they were using cheaper machines that were slower, it just wasn't feasible. And I actually ended up taking the material that I needed for the sign, shipping it back to South Carolina to my friend Bill, basically paying him the cost of whatever he needed to do it, and he'd ship it back. And that was cheaper than it was to get it made locally. Now it took, 3 weeks sometimes to do that, but it was dramatically cheaper. But with that in mind, I knew that it was not sustainable because Bill has his own business to run and he needs his machines for him. He can't keep doing things for me. So that's when I looked into upgrading to my EPILOG Fusion M2. So this one is a 28-inch by 40-inch bed. Now, when I looked, I couldn't afford a brand new one. So I looked at used. And when I did that, it shaved off a few $1,000s, which was great. I ended up going ahead and doing a leasing agreement for the Fusion M2. Now I'm still paying on the leasing agreement. It was for 4 years at a certain interest rate. I don't recall what it was at the moment. I did it as an investment in myself and the business that I wanted to grow. And it was a risk. I knew that I couldn't pull out any money from my work paycheck to do it, so I had to make sure all payments were made from the laser machining side of the business and everything I do. So it kind of lit a fire where, you know, now it's basically like paying off a car, essentially. This one, I ended up paying $28,500 with a rotary attachment and a camera on the system for a 60-watt machine. It's not a small amount of money, and I decided that I needed to sell off the Mini 24 to have any chance at making this a reality. I found somebody locally, it's actually now my friend Josh, who runs Unhinged Labs, and sold him my laser. And at the time, I was looking at the market value of the Mini 24 machines. And some were selling, you know, $14,000, $15,000, $13,000. So I decided to list mine at 12 and just see what happened. I listed it for 12 because it was slightly below what the other ones were selling for, because at the time, I just don't think there were that many out there for resale or even, you know, on the market, period. And ended up selling it to my friend Josh now for the $12,000. And he's in town, so I can show him things when he needs it, or help him if he needs help with something. So it was also a good investment for me because I bought that machine used and used it for a while and replaced some components and then sold it for more than I bought it for. So it was a good investment. I won't say that that's the case all the time. It doesn't always happen, but I did a lot of research up front that it paid off on the back end. And I've been running this M2 since November of 2018. So it's going on 2 years old for me. Since then, I have been working on videos. So I started my YouTube channel, started making videos, and started taking it more seriously this year, 2020, and tried to be more consistent, putting out one video a week. And in addition to that, when I was buying my machine, I went to a lot of trade shows that were in town. So fortunately, Vegas, before the pandemic and everything, was kind of the trade show central. They were here all the time. So I went to one of the trade shows here called SGIA and met with one of the distributors out of California, which is Cutting Edge Systems, and got to know the owner of that company. You know, stayed in touch with him over the next year. So from 2018 to 2019, I had stayed in contact with him and said, hey, let me know when you're coming back for a trade show. I'd like to meet up. So I went back to the next trade show where he was, and he introduced me to one of the marketing guys at EPILOG's headquarters because he was in town for the trade show as well. So I used that opportunity to pitch him on me. I said, hey, this is what I do. I'd love to be able to create a long-term relationship with you guys down the road. And I'd just like to stay in touch and get to know you and show you what I can do and what I'm capable of. And kind of left it at that. And stayed in contact with him. The biggest thing was providing value up front. So I did a ton of videos on what I was making. Regardless of how much they were viewed, I felt that they were valuable because it showed that I was dedicated to putting out content for what I was doing using their machines. And it was something where I could show what they did, and it gave their company value because it shows their machines in the background, and they didn't have to pay me to do it because I truly love the EPILOG brand, and I didn't go in, like, I'm not being paid to basically sell them. It was, I genuinely love the machine and love what it does, and decided to start making more content on it. Now in the late part of 2019, I submitted to be a speaker at WorkbenchCon. So in 2020, I got accepted to speak at WorkbenchCon and did a course on lasers. And because I was on a course on lasers, I contacted the guy at EPILOG and said, hey, I have this opportunity where I'm going to be speaking about lasers. I think it'd be awesome to have an EPILOG machine there to run and show people what it does and talk about it as part of my presentation. So not really pitch EPILOG, but just pitch laser machining. And after some back and forth about what it would entail and how it would work, he had agreed. So I went to Workbench Con and did the presentation with their machine and made sure that it arrived safely and that it got packaged up and then shipped back safely with the freight and everything. I feel that that's really what helped me propel to where I am now. So for those of you that don't know, throughout 2020, I actually was fortunate enough that EPILOG sponsored one of my videos. So they did pay me to do one of the videos that I made, and then gave me a link to click on for more information if you wanted to see it. That was a good turning point for me because in the past, EPILOG didn't really work with people that were doing videos. And I had been able over the past couple of years to build up that rapport and that relationship to a point where I felt I was trusted enough to basically show their machine on their behalf. Now I'm fortunate enough that I was asked to test the latest beta machine. So behind me is the Fusion Edge. So if you've been watching my channel, you know that I've done some unboxing videos on the machine as well as some other videos on this machine. And for this one, they basically said, hey, we're gonna send you this machine. We want you to test it and use it and provide feedback and also create videos with it. I'll be upfront, there's no like signed contract or anything between us right now. I don't know how long I get to keep the machine for, but it's at least for a few months so I can make some content, which I think is a great step forward, and it gives me the opportunity to show EPILOG what I can do. So that's how I ended up with my Fusion M2 and the Fusion Edge. So right now I'm running 2 lasers, and I feel very fortunate that I have that ability. And overall, I attribute all of that to the effort and work that I've put in over the years. It's not something that is going to happen quickly, and it's not something that's easy to do, and it's a ton of work. I'm talking late nights, 3 in the morning, editing video, shooting video. It's, you know, pulling 40-hour weeks after your 40-hour-a-week job. It's a ton of work, and if you want to make it happen, you can make it happen, but you have to put in the work. And that's the biggest thing that I kind of want to share with all of you is I think there's a lot of negative connotations with some of social media where people see that I own an EPILOG and then I'm running a second and they think that I just bought them and here I am. And that's not the case because I started with a cheaper machine and had to work my way up and get to the point I am now. I didn't go in buying the most expensive machine on a loan. It's just not how I'm programmed. I don't like taking out loans if I don't have to. I don't like taking on debt if I don't have to. I have to see a real need to have it, and I need to be able to justify it and be able to manage the risks because that's just how I'm wired. So that's kind of just the story of how I got to where I am. I've been through cheaper machines. I've used cheaper machines. I have even run other people's machines that were not EPILOGs, as well as people's machines that are EPILOGs. And it's taught me a lot and I've learned a lot. So at this point, I'm about 7 years into the laser machining side. I still learn something new just about every day because there's just so much to learn and there's so many materials you can work with. It's just astounding. You're never gonna know everything, but I feel that lasers are kind of what I'm good at and it's what I enjoy. And I'm going to start trying to do more laser content and laser related content moving into 2021. If there's laser content you want to see and videos you want to see specifically, let me know in the comments below because I'm always looking for ideas. It's always my goal to not only put out content that I want to make, but also put out content that you want to see. Because if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be able to keep doing the YouTube channel. The AdSense revenue and being able to create projects and things like that is what helps me keep this going. So I know this video was long and maybe it could have been shorter, but I just wanted to let you guys know, how I got started and where I was in the beginning. We all start from zero. And if you put your head down and you work hard at it and you have a plan, you can get to the level you want to be at. It may not be a short timeline. It may take a couple of years, maybe even 7, but I can say that it's worth it. And I'm going to keep pushing myself to create new content and keep pushing what I can do and see where this goes. Because the one thing, if I can say anything to you, is if you want to work with a company and you want to do something with them, you have to convince them that you're worth it. And I decided to do that by buying a machine, working on it ahead of time, doing videos with it, and using that as basically my portfolio to convince them that I was worth the return and worth them investing in and worth them looking at. It's always worth a shot to ask a company if they'll work with you, but you have to bring them a reason. You can't just say, hey, I have 15,000 followers or 100,000 followers or a million followers. You can't just go to them and say, hey, I have X number of followers, give me a free machine. It doesn't work that way. They have to prove that it's worth it. Now, whether that's through sales or, showing what they can do. The biggest thing I see is a lot of people are asking for free stuff, but not showing what they're going to give in return. You want to take and take and take, but you're not willing to give. And I took a vastly different approach to a lot of people I was seeing, and I tried to give as much as I could up front and not ask for anything at all. And it took years of doing that to get to the point where I've been fortunate enough that I get to test a new machine. That's my story, and hopefully you found it helpful. If you want to know anything else, or if you want to know any more details, let me know in the comments below or shoot me an email. I'm always willing to answer questions as long as I can get to them. But I want to, if you're still watching, I want to thank you for watching the video and supporting my channel. It truly does mean a lot, because every minute you watch helps my channel grow and helps me get in front of more eyes, which enables me to do more things with machines. And I want to thank you so much for helping support me. It really does mean a lot. So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Be sure to check out my Instagram @MakerExperiment, where I share all of my stuff along the way. I want to thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.